for the Carolinas. Zach.
Hey, everybody.
And we also have our end user computing, Justin. So with that, I'll get going on the presentation here. So when we look at IT in county government, there's a number of challenges. And what we tried to do here is really kind of depict many of the things that you're dealing with day in and day out. And a lot of that is continuing to provide new services and continuing to evolve and do that with a shrinking budget, as well as limited staff, and the ability to do things on demand and addressing both legacy applications, new applications, mobility, you name it. There's a lot of things that folks are looking at and trying to address. In addition, we see this every day now in terms of top of mind, in terms of various security attacks, and trying to make sure our enterprise IT environment is both secure and compliant. And then again, as we alluded to before, shrinking dollars, but the ability to do more with less. Again, when we look at this as well, we kind of double click down when we look at a lot of the various areas that we support with the various departments within the county, be it first responders, be it within social services, be it within some of the CJIS compliance and other things that all of IT is having to deal with these days. And then on top of that, things where you're having to deal with credit card information and social security numbers and things of that sort, with be it PCI and other kinds of things where you're handling money. And again, the citizens and the expectations where more and more things need to be online and instantaneous and things of that sort. So these are, again, trying to depict the landscape and where we are today with IT and where NSX really comes into play. So another question, how many people today are doing some form of virtualization, be it with VMware or some of the other solutions out there? So I'm assuming for many of you, you're running vSphere or a vSphere-like product in terms of your data center and getting with that the consolidation of being able to do things virtually versus physical hardware, correct? For most of you, it'd be vSphere and vCenter. And again, it's really about taking that physical compute and virtualizing it. Well, where we're coming as a company is really more and more of the data center is being done in software. So in addition to being able to do what we've been doing for servers for many years, and if those who have been around for a while, like myself, remember the days where people were very reluctant, both customers and software companies, to say, let's virtualize this application. Everybody's like, no, we can't do that. We won't get it supported, it won't work, yada, yada, yada. We all know that that's entirely untrue, because as we look today, you can virtualize, essentially every application out there with very, very few exceptions today. The other is we're now moved into taking physical storage and being able to provide that in a software environment. I don't know how many of you are familiar with hyperconverged, and one of the solutions that's very popular these days is vSAN. And essentially being able to take commodity hardware from your server environment and create a high-performing SAN. So these are just simple ATA drives or solid-state drives, and you combine them using vSphere. You click on vSAN, and all of a sudden you create a high-performing SAN. Very helpful in terms of auxiliary storage. We have people doing it for remote sites. We have people doing it as ancillary storage for their core data center. And we have a lot of customers looking at it more and more as they look at refreshing the SAN. Is this a technology that we should consider? And the features and functionality have grown immensely in this area. The next one is where we're going to spend our time today, and that is in the network. And the network is probably one of the more difficult areas to virtualize, but we acquired a company called Nicira about 2.5 years ago. It came out of a Stanford research project, very similar to vSphere, many years ago. But what we're able to do with network virtualization is abstract the network piece now for you. So again, that really provides some real unique and some interesting capabilities that you can't do in a physical environment. One of the big areas is security. But another area is things like IP mobility and being able to move applications around dynamically. And we'll talk more about that, but just kind of laying the landscape. So for a lot of data centers, as you look at this, and again, as you virtualize your data center, you've built a private cloud. But many are looking now at public clouds and other kinds of solutions out there. The beauty of it is with VMware, we have a cloud offering, and we have partnerships with IBM and with AWS and others today, where we can create what we call hybrid cloud. And what a hybrid cloud is essentially the same bits that you're running in your data center today, you can migrate out into a cloud, run them there. Let's say you have an application that's very bursty, and there are times of the year, rather than building to the maximum, I'm going to just span out into the cloud, use it for a period of time, and then move those workloads back. That's a simple use case. There's others where, you see it today with mail. A lot of people running 365 in the cloud. It's like, this isn't core to our business. We'd rather have it in the cloud and not have to deal with it day in and day out. We want to focus on our core applications. No different. So the whole concept now is our ability to offer the hybrid cloud and continuing to allow you to play in that area. The beauty of this is NSX spans all of this. So we don't care where you want to, essentially allowing you to run your applications anywhere, any place. And that's really kind of the theme that John will continue on. And again, people that really want to create, and we have some large counties and other organizations that want to do IT as a service, where you can present yourself as an Amazon or a vCloud Air or Azure, where you can do IT as a service and you can get business intelligence and you can show your end users what it's costing to run a specific application. We have all those tools, and we can build out those building blocks for people that want to do that. And that's another set of solutions, but again, something I wanted to just make you aware of. So getting back to NSX, we talked about the hardware elements in these capacities, and as you can see, all the things in the colored area, we're able to do now in software. And there's, again, tremendous benefits as you look at your applications and what you're able to do with them. So, again, getting back, as we look at your day-to-day world, and again, what we try to help customers understand is if you really want to move the needle and you want to be transformative, it's these kind of technologies that are going to allow you to do things differently and really see some major returns like you did when you started virtualizing your servers. It allows you to get away and not be so concerned with the legacy requirements, but enabling you to do more modern applications, but still bring legacy solutions forward if you need that. The balancing act of both agility and security and being able to address those things, because again, the demands to be able to provision workloads and get things done quickly, being able to do things in a customized fashion, and again, the whole concept, because again, you see a lot of people struggle with this, is as I move into the cloud, how do I make sure my applications are secure and I'm not going to be subject to risk and breaches and things of this sort. And our solutions are going to speak to that as well. So with that, again, when we look at the whole discussion about NSX as well, one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking to customers about is not only the technology, but how do we transition both the people and the process? I mean, it seems like there's going to be this battle between the infrastructure people and the network people trying to do this. Well, I kind of equate it to what VoIP did, because if you think about it, before VoIP became so popular and people were doing, voice over IP, you had analog telephone people running around trying to manage that environment. And as you move to VoIP, it really became kind of a hybrid role. It's like, we need people that understand the digital world, but we also still need people that have that background and understand how analog and the phone still work. NSX is very similar. It's a blending of, we're pulling things that we've done on the infrastructure side of things, but there's a lot of networking capabilities that we're going to accomplish by virtualizing these elements. So again, I would say have that mindset as you look and see, because this is where the industry is going. This is where the next transformative areas in data center and how people are looking at computing. And where they want to achieve things. And again, it gets back to that whole consumer model with people with all their different devices and being able to serve up apps and getting things done quickly. From a security standpoint, and you see this again all the time, how do I make sure not only my on-premise, but all the other areas, be it my phones, be it my desktops, how do I secure this stuff? Well, NSX runs in all of these environments. And that, again, gives you another capability or an approach that really is overreaching and overarching, I should say. And again, a lot of this stuff, we've been working on this now for 2.5 years. There's a lot of the partner ecosystems working with us, as well as we're seeing a lot of adoption in the federal government and a lot of the federal standards that you would want to have in your data center environment are being adopted here. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to John Jones. And John, thank you.
Sure. Again, my name is John Jones. I'm from Columbia, Southern born and bred. So you might recognize my accent a little better. Jack, we love Jack. Anyway, so Nsx, and like what I do, like Jack was saying, I like to focus on the application, because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to deliver to our customers, an application. We're not trying to deliver them a large data center full of servers. They want service. They want to get to their application. They want it to be available. They want it to be secure. They want to be able to enter their credit card information without having to worry about it. Those types of things. And that's what we're aiming to solve with Nsx. It's a lot of different technologies and things that we've combined into the suite. I like to call it a suite, but Nsx is not necessarily a suite, but it has a lot of different components. Security being a major component, network virtualization being another major component. Again, at the end of the day, though, what we're doing is focusing on the app. So, like Jack said, there's portability to other clouds. What we're doing is allowing customers to possibly even go on a subscription basis in the near future with clouds like AWS, so that they go away from, I have this large physical data center, I've got to utilize all this space, or else it's just a waste of space. We all know that that's inefficient, and that's how a lot of data centers run today. And so there's a lot of interest in the cloud. Big question is, today, when developers move to the cloud, what happens? They don't fall under the umbrella of corporate security or corporate governance and all of those things. All their workloads are just kind of willy-nilly out in the cloud, right? And so that's the problem we're going after. We're going after the application, we're securing the application, we're giving that application the ability to go from one data center to another. And we're also, we have some other use cases that include stuff like survivability. Being able to actually perform disaster recovery without going in and recabling, reconfiguring firewalls. Doing all of those things automatically. Because we've extracted all of that technology, all of your firewalls, I shouldn't say all, we still rely on physical hardware for speeds and feeds. We can't get rid of that Cat5 cable yet. But what services we relied on from that physical network have now been moved into the hypervisor. And so now that the applications that run on those hypervisors are getting service directly from that same host. So it's not having to hit the network to be load balanced. It's not having to hit the network to hit a firewall. It's not having to hit the network in order to just do a simple routing function. It all happens on the hypervisor now, just as if it were an x86 virtualization. Same thing we've done with x86 virtualization. We allow you to run separate threads. We're doing the same thing with firewalling, networking, security, all of that grand stuff. So, again, but the focus is on the application. Delivering a secure, highly available, recoverable application. So, what we do and how we go about this with Nsx is we can do things like Jack said. We use Nsx for migrations. So we have customers that will build a greenfield environment. And generally migrations are difficult because your heterogeneous hardware environment is hard to replicate, really. Usually when you're building a new data center or a new environment, you don't repeat the mistakes that you made before, and so what you're building is not going to be exactly like what you have in place, right? And so what we do is we give you the ability to replicate your current environment in software, just as you do in the virtual space today. You build servers like you did 15, 20 years ago. We physically went out and stuck a disk in a server, booted it up, and installed the operating system. And that was physically building a server. Today, we virtually insert the disk into the image, boot it up, install the operating system. That's a virtual disk, or a virtual server. What we're doing on the infrastructure side is we're doing similar things. We're installing a firewall. We have a firewall that runs right at the VNIC. The VNIC is the most highly segmented area that we can get to because we own the VNIC, because we are VMware. So what that means is we can control traffic, even if it's all in one big flat VLAN on your actual physical network, and all the VMs are all in the same broadcast domain. We can prevent VMs from communicating with each other because we're giving them a layer 2 through 4 firewall right at the VNIC. And even if the VM is compromised, there's no way for that firewall to become compromised. So if you compare that to like a host-based system that runs an agent can actually be a security vulnerability. It really can, because agents have elevated privileges, and there's cases in which agents have been compromised along with the host or along with the VM, and it's actually allowed the person doing the bad stuff to gain elevated privileges. Also, on this slide, one thing I want to focus on is changes in application architectures. Traditionally, what we do, like I said, if this were one large data center, we may have a rack over in the corner. That is our DMZ rack, and it has its own physical architecture. We know that anything that's web-facing, we have to go put it in that corner rack. That's a physical architecture limitation, right? And so what we can do with NSX, because we provide a firewall, is you can put your workloads in any rack. They can go on any host, and we can apply a DMC policy that regardless of where that workload lives, not only does that DMC policy follow it, so it can vMotion, you can get better utilization out of all of your hardware. It can vMotion around, the policy stays with it, and it can live
I know. It's when I stand over, it feels like the guy's coming through the floor again.
So, what we see a lot when people initially start to get into building out an NSX infrastructure, especially when they want to do network virtualization, is we'll see people do they have their current infrastructure, then they'll rebuild their infrastructure in the virtual space, make it look just like same VLANs and same naming, all of that, same IP schemes. They'll build it in the virtual space so they can migrate their applications over without having to make any changes, if that makes sense. And we usually see that as a first step if people want to do network virtualization. And again, in order to get to the security focus that we're talking about, you don't have to do the network virtualization piece. The network virtualization piece allows you to extend to other data centers, basically. So if you ever want to be able to extend a layer 2 to another data center using VXLAN, which is what the technology is that we use network virtualization. We can extend it up to like IBM software, vCloud Air, AWS is on the roadmap. We're working on different hypervisors, vSwitches for different hypervisors. So if you have clusters of other vendors' hypervisors, you can actually extend into that in the near future as well. So, kind of went over this, and I know I went over a lot. Again, from what I've seen in the field, and I have been delivering this since we purchased Nsx, is security of apps and data is really the highlight of what we're doing here. There's not been a product outside of a firewall that anyone's ever really tried to use. You know, we have IPS, IDS, those types of security components. But really people depend on the firewalls to be that layer of security at the boundary or at the edge, and which is great. The problem is the largest breaches that we've had or we've seen, a lot of them come from internal threats, or they come from someone who knows that the outside of the perimeter is secure, but all you have to do is breach a system that's on the inside. You guys have heard of Horry County in South Carolina where they had the ransomware, those types of things. Target, same way. Target had if you're not familiar, the way Target was breached a couple years ago was there was an HVAC vendor. He had a laptop. The bad guys who were trying to get the information knew that this HVAC vendor was able to go into Target and plug his laptop in. Well, as soon as he plugged his laptop in, it went everywhere because there's no segmentation inside their data center. Segmentation comes from being able to control in between zones. And so this is where Nsx starts to pay dividends. We can control, we can create segments because we have firewalls at every VNet. So if we want to say in one application, say standard 3-tier application, if we want to control the flow from the web to the to the middle app tier to the DB tier, we would say web can only communicate with app. An app can only communicate with DB. That's very simplistic. We've used the ports and protocols as well. But you can see now that host can only communicate to the very exact point that it's allowed to communicate. So by creating that roadmap for that flow, you're only going to allow that machine, that virtual machine, to communicate to its required components inside the data center. So if it's like an Exchange server, we have a front, middle, and back end. What that does is prevent an attacker who may, we're not saying we can prevent an attack. What we can do is prevent the spread of the attack. So what that does is prevent that infected host, say this was Target, and say it had Target been using Nsx, what that would have prevented the infection from doing is spreading inside the data center. Because now that host is contained. And if he's not using the port and protocol to communicate directly to the only other host in the environment that he's allowed to communicate with, the communication is going to be dropped. And it's actually dropped right there at the VNet on the host without having to hit the network, because we deliver these services in the hypervisor. But this is where Nsx comes to play. So in the virtual world, we can talk about automation and how speed of app delivery plays a part. Nsx is all API driven, and what that means is that you can script out a data center build, you can script out an application build, whatever it is that you need to deploy. Nsx has a load balancer, it has a VPN, it has a site-to-site VPN. All the network core functionality that you need to run a data center is delivered in the software now through Nsx. Again, that does not remove the dependency on the physical network. You still have to be able to plug a server in and get it to plug into a switch or a hub if you have a hub. It's been a while. But some people might still have hubs, I don't know. But you still have to physically wire it up in order for the communication to occur. So where we like to say Nsx fits, and this really is because of where the firewall sits, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. Usually what happens when you tighten security in an environment, the user's experience goes down, right? Users hate security. And when you loosen security in an environment, we tend to work more hours because we end up having to fix everything that gets broken, right? And so there has to be a happy place in the middle there somewhere. And in the position of the Nsx firewall, and not just the firewall, the fact that we can insert services at that same position, right at the VNet, so right below the VM, right below the workload. We can insert advanced services like Palo Alto next generation firewall scanning. So if you want to do a layer 7, you can do Fortinet, Palo Alto. There's some other vendors that we integrate with. That can happen at the VM level versus having to travel the network, go all the way across the network and hit a hardware device. We can make that happen at the host. So because that firewall sits disassociated from the VM, but it's actually below the VM, that's the most safe place that firewall can be. I mean, it's just 2 through 4, so we're saying port and protocol, source and destination type rules. But what that does is remove the workload from being a possible defect. So what that also gives us is the ability to sustain possible images such as like Windows 2003, that's out of date, basically. You can't support, it's non-supportable anymore. So it's a way to keep, I used to work in the hospital industry, so that used to be a big deal for us. A lot of our vendors wouldn't update their products to the latest OS. So now we can plug up the holes that those OSs leave open, and they can only if they can only communicate with the destinations that they are required to communicate with, we've created a much more safe environment, because now all of those attackers that would be able to hit this, Windows 2003 is completely invulnerable at this point. But now we can actually secure it because we have a firewall sitting right below it. Not running on it, but right below it. So I'm going to try to get through this. It seems like we're checking your watch. We got about, what, 10 more? So, just like Jack mentioned before, we've been doing compute virtualization for quite a while. If you remember, if you actually work on the hardware, if you remember the first time you saw a vMotion occur, if it was like me, I was like, wow, that's really cool. And that was actually when I decided I wanted to work for VMware. I saw a vMotion, I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. So now we've virtualized the storage component. Jack talked a little about vSAN, and NSX being the networking component. Key being that if it's in your data center or if it's in your vSphere environment, why not just let it stay in the vSphere environment? It does not have to leave the virtual environment to receive services. I want to talk about this just for a second. Any IP network, what that means is, if you look at this hardware here, what these are physical switches. All that we need in order for NSX to function is a routable IP space. So as long as these hosts can route to the other hosts in your environment, that's the only requirement in order for us to be able to build our virtual networks on the top of that physical switching and routing environment. So basically what I'm saying is what you have today will work. You don't have to change anything. You don't have to add anything. You don't have to buy new hardware to make it work. We can build any infrastructure, virtual infrastructure, on top of what you have today. As long as it's IP. I don't think anyone's probably running IP yet. So. Simplicity. And if you're used to the vSphere interface, all of this is done through vCenter, the vCenter web client. This goes back into the network virtualization component. What I was talking about earlier, we have our host, and inside of our host, these are the components that are actually running on the host, so that we have a distributed router, a distributed switch, distributed load balancer, distributed firewall. And then we call it distributed in the same manner that Facebook and Amazon and all those guys run those large data centers that everybody wants high compute capacity with. They create distributed environments. That's what we're building here. So now with an enterprise-grade product, we can build distributed compute environments. We can build, I mean, that's what vSphere is. It's a distributed compute environment. Now we're just building a distributed networking environment, a distributed firewalling environment, meaning that where the workload lives, it will receive those services. It does not have to hit the network. That server that it lives on will give them a firewall, a router, a switch, load balancer, all of that. The reason why that's important, and it may, depending on the size of your data center, the reason why it may be effective or not really matter that much, but for large scale, the larger scale you go, the more efficient your system becomes. So traditionally, when you have an application that lives on a single host that needs to talk with another application, so say these guys, say this is a single host here, and we have 3 different applications. Traditionally, what would happen if one of these VMs needed to communicate with another VM in another application, it would have to go down through the network, hit a firewall to get authorized, come back across the network and go back to the same host just to send that flow. Because we're providing this hypervisor layer, or this network virtualization layer here on the host, these applications, as long as the rule set says it's okay, these applications will communicate to each other in memory space. It doesn't leave the host. So we're creating efficiency. We're building efficiency upon the hardware that you already have. So another thing that Nsx also does is allow you to make better use or get more use out of the current hardware you have. And really, this slide here, what we like to focus on, or at least what I like to impress upon you, is what I was saying earlier. Usually when we put an application into the data center, we're physically constrained by the data center's configuration. The data center may have a DMZ rack in one corner, and it may only be at 10% utilization because you don't have that many components that need to be in it, but you have to have a DMZ rack for compliance, right? And so what that does is really, it's a waste. It becomes a waste. It becomes an inefficient security model. And so what we're doing is driving business efficiency. We're allowing you to better utilize the hardware you have, the routing, switching, firewalling hardware that you currently have, as well as the server infrastructure that you currently have. By doing that, what we're able to do is actually allow IT to build what it is the business needs. So whatever the business focus is, if the business needs to be able to rapidly deploy, do automation, have a disaster recovery plan, all of those things we can now build because we have the tools to do it in Nsx. Again, those are the things I talked about, how it's being applied. We talked about security and how the microsegmentation or how the distributed firewall enables us to better enhance security at the VNIC level. Haven't talked much about automation, but we can build these environments through the API. And when I say through the API, we can use something as vRealize automation, or OpenStack even, or vCloud Director, any cloud management product. It can communicate with Nsx through the API, and it can automate the deployment of all of these features. And so for those who have developers, they love this. They love to be able to go to a catalog of items and say, click, give me that, and it will deploy all of the services, all the VMs, everything with the security applied to it without having to have any further interaction with the system. So pretty high speed. And application continuity, this is one that I want to touch on a little bit more because I hadn't had a chance to yet. We talked about this quite a bit. And you can see here, here's a visualization. This is security. This is a visualization of the firewall. So you can see that we have 3 tiers. And with this configuration here, because the firewall sits at the VM, if the web wants to talk to app and that's allowed, it will be routed and go straight through. But you can see if web wants to talk to directly to DB for some reason, that rule will state right there at the VNIC, no, you're not allowed to go any further than that, and that communication will never occur. It will not hit the wire, it won't waste data, it won't waste bandwidth. It basically, again, if it's virtual, it's going to stay in the virtual world. This is the automation piece. With vRealize Automation, which is one of our CMP's cloud management products, our automation front end for vSphere, what we can do is build blueprints. And a blueprint may be a lab for a classroom or something of the nature. We could say, build me a Biology 101 lab. And what that blueprint does is it deploys all the VMs necessary for the lab, deploys the networks, and it deploys the security policies. And so with the click of a button, in this scenario, a student would be able to deploy the lab that they need and get the work done they need, but it also, what it does is you can set time frames. And so you can build elasticity, meaning that you could deploy this environment, but it might have a 2-day time frame on it. So at the end of 2 days, if it's not being used any longer, you can get that space back. So You can do more through automation and through the API with Nsx than you can through the vCenter GUI. There's more options available than you would get through the GUI. Now this one's important, and this is the one I was just talking about with the application continuity. One big announcement that just happened was the fact that we're going to be integrating with AWS. So we have a lot of customers who have workloads in AWS for whatever reason it may be. A lot of development customers generally have workloads out there. The big deal here is what I've talked about with security and availability, we can now extend into an AWS data center. So AWS being the market leader in cloud, basically, so they have data centers everywhere. We can provide that high level of availability and basically 5 nines of service, because that's what AWS is capable of providing. We can have that infrastructure available to us, and you can extend your local data center out to AWS now. So what happens is it deploys a new vCenter, however many hosts that you pay for from AWS, they're all ESXi now. So you're not having to convert workloads over to AWS. You don't have to convert them. You don't have to convert the VMs. We can vMotion, move workloads directly from your local data center up to AWS. The key to this is that nothing changes as far as your security. Nothing changes as far as your networking. All of it stays the same. We can, like I said earlier, we're using network virtualization to combine these two data centers together. So if you're familiar with older technologies such as hardware-based technologies such as OTV, those are all DCIs, so those are ways to stretch layer 2 across a metro link or whatever it may be. What we're using is network virtualization to create one large data center. So now somewhat similar to the cluster model, where we started to combine a host of compute together, so we had a large pool of really memory, storage, and compute capacity. What we're doing now is we're combining data centers together. So now by combining data centers together throughout the world, basically, what we've done is give us the ability to put the workloads where they need to be, for whatever reason. Everybody has their own reasons. It may be a cost efficiency thing. It could be like a subscription model, like I said. You don't have to necessarily run a large data center 24/7 if you only need it 2 weeks out of the year for the most part. Some customers are that way. And then we also have this model to help with things such as disaster recovery. And the way that it can help with disaster recovery is that we can replicate, excuse me, say this is your main data center. If you have more capacity in another data center or a cloud data center, what we can do is replicate our networks, replicate our security model, and using products such as Site Recovery Manager, we could actually smoking hole this data center, and all the workloads will come back online without having to re-IP anything, without having to change any of the ACLs in the firewall, without having to update any security policy. These applications will come back online, and users will be able to still access those applications. So you can see how that's a big deal. That's actually a big use case that we see in the government space, because it might not be the entire data center that you want to protect. It could be 4, 5, 10 virtual servers that you really need to protect, and we can do that very easily. Move it over to another location or send it to the cloud, turn it back. Because the networks are extended already, that's why you don't have to re-IP, and because the security policy stays with the VM, there's no rewriting the firewall policies. Everything stays exactly the same. And that kind of is one of the things that's inherent of the product, but it's actually a use case that has grown because people start to understand what the product does more. And they understand that, hey, we can use this to make our services more highly available, basically. You can see the application can move back and forth across those. We have, as far as customer base, our Nsx is kind of spreading pretty quickly. You see we have commercial and other types of customers. This is a healthcare customer here. This customer here uses an active data center configuration. So in the city of Boston, they have 3 data centers, and we are using network virtualization and microsegmentation to allow them to move their workloads all across the city, so if they need to do maintenance or whatever it may be, so that they don't have to have downtime at all in order to maintain their system. I like this use case because I'm the one that actually built it. I help with Heartland as well. So, point being, you can see how Heartland is using a PCI environment inside the same host, on the same rack, inside the same environment as the rest of their workloads. And it is accredited, meaning that you can run, on a single host, you can run PCI, CGIS, and regular workloads, and that can be accredited. I mean, that's the level of security Nsx provides. Allow those workloads to work right next to each other and still give you that real security, not security through obscurity. And that should be awesome. So, this is just a little history, the evolution of compute. Most of you guys are probably 100% familiar with this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. You can see how we went from the mainframe workstation model to the client-server model, where it's a unified stack, basically. Everyone knew exactly how to build the program. It went onto a Microsoft operating system, whatever it may be. And then we moved to the cloud, whereas the cloud it abstracts all of that, and you don't care what it's on, you just want to make sure it's running. So the evolution of networking has kind of been behind the 8 ball whenever it comes to the differences. Networking has always been very vendor specific, and we even know that network protocols are vendor specific, and that still exists today. So, based off of what we've seen happen in the compute model, that's exactly where we're taking Nsx. So we're taking Nsx to the next level to enable our customers to have the best agility, availability, and reliability of their networks and systems that they need. So we can the key being we can pretty much design just about anything, and it doesn't require additional hardware for it to function. It just moves it into the hypervisor. That's all it is. It's pretty cool. That's why I work with it. So one big picture, one last thing really. Nsx can be used, again, to move workloads into the public cloud. So you can see that we've got Amazon, Azure, VMware vCloud Air, Google. We can secure container implementation. So if you guys are using container, Kubernetes, anything of that nature. Works with mobile devices. So you can do bring your own device. We can use Workspace ONE and the other components of the EUC from the EUC environment. And what it does is it allows you to run the applications in your data center without the threat of anything on that laptop, that Android phone, or anything of that nature hijacking that session. It keeps the session just as secure as if the user was actually sitting at a server in the workstation doing what they were doing. So, and AirWatch actually gives us the ability to port applications to allow us to do those and run those on any device, actually. VDI, one great thing about VDI, today VDI sessions are all pretty much a layer 2 segment, meaning that if you're in a VDI session, you're in the same broadcast domain as every other VDI session, which is a humongous security hole. But for the same reason, it is in the data center. Nsx can allow you to utilize security groups from Active Directory, so I can say the student security group only gets access to these 3 systems, and that's all they get. So in our VDI use case, we can utilize Active Directory to do what we call what's the name of that thing? Identity-based firewalling. So you will get rules based on the membership of the account that you log on with. So that's really important in the VDI use case. On-premise, you can see we're going with multiple hypervisors here in the new future. That didn't even come out close to right. Hyper-V, KVM, Internet of Things. We're working with partners on the Internet of Things, and we have solutions for the branch office. Point is, that's a huge solution right there. It's a huge software package. One last thing I want to mention, every 3 years, people are used to doing software or hardware refreshes because new products come out with new services. If you want the latest and greatest from your largest hardware vendor, what do? You have to refresh every single product in your data center, and that costs a ton of money. Andrew used to be with Dell. I'm sure he's seen some big numbers before. With Nsx, if you buy Nsx and you own Nsx, we continuously improve the product. So we're continuously adding functionality to the product. All that you need to do in order to gain that additional functionality is just upgrade to the latest version. And you can upgrade for free if you own it. So you can look from 6.0, which is where it started, to where it is today. And it's about 3 times as functional today as it was at 6.0. But if you bought it at 6.0, you have the functionality that exists today. That's what I have.
John, thank you. Some other quick things before we wrap it up is the solution for NSX is sold very similar to vSphere. It's sold by CPU. There's 3 different tiers. There's Enterprise, Advanced, and Standard. You can also buy it for virtual desktops. So if you're running Horizon, other kinds of products, we can also quote it for those solutions as well. For most customers, it's really about looking at your environment, identifying use cases. Security is a big one, obviously. DR with IP mobility, things of that sort. And what I would tell you is it's not very similar to vSphere. I mean, most people, you kind of crawl, walk, run, you find a use case, you start playing with it. What we found with most of our customers, they start utilizing it, and all of a sudden the lights go on and say, oh my gosh, it's going to help me here, here, and here. We've had conversations with counties where they're looking at this, and they quickly realize that, again, there are so many different areas that this is going to help them make life easier, but also do it more securely and compliantly. So, again, I want to thank everybody for your time today. I know it's hard being the end of the day, so thank you again.
Thank you, guys.